Infinite Jest, Part 10, by David Foster Wallace. And just before 1:45 hour at 2 April, YDAU, his wife arrived back home and uncovered her hair and came in, and saw the Near Eastern medical attaché and his face and tray and eyes, and the soiled condition of his special recliner, and rushed to his side, crying his name aloud, touching his head, trying to get a response, failing to get any response to her. He still staring straight ahead, and eventually, and naturally, she, noting that the expression on his rictus of a face nevertheless appeared very positive, ecstatic, even, you could say. She eventually and naturally turning her head and following his line of sight to the cartridge viewer. Gerhardt Schtitt, head coach and athletic director at the Enfield Tennis Academy, Enfield, Massachusetts, was wooed fiercely by the ETA headmaster, Dr. James Incandenza, just about begged to come on board the moment the academy's hilltop was shaved flat and the place was up and running. Incandenza had decided he was going to bring Schtitt on board or bust. This, even though Schtitt had then just lately been asked to resign from the staff of a Nick Bollettieri camp in Sarasota because of a really unfortunate incident involving a riding crop. By now, though, pretty much everybody now at ETA feels as though stories about Schtitt's whole corporal punitive thing must have been pumped up out of all sane proportion, because even though Schtitt still does favor those high and shiny black boots, and yes, the epaulets still and now a weatherman's telescoping pointer that's a clear stand-in for the now forbidden old riding crop, he has, Schtitt, at near what must be 70, mellowed to the sort of elder statesman point where he's become mostly a dispenser of abstractions rather than discipline, a philosopher instead of a king. His felt presence is here mostly verbal. The weatherman's pointer has not made corrective contact with even one athletic bottom in Schtitt's whole 9 years at ETA. Still, although he now has all those Lebensfahrtens and protectors to administer most of the necessary little character-building cruelties, Schtitt does like his occasional bit of fun still. But when Schtitt dons the leather helmet and goggles and revs up the old FRG-era BMW cycle and trails the sweating ETA squads up the Calm Avenue hills into East Newton on their PM conditioning runs, making judicious use of his pea shooter to discourage straggling sluggards, it's usually 18-year-old Mario Incandenza who gets to ride along in the sidecar, carefully braced and strapped, the wind blowing his thin hair straight back off his oversized head, beaming and waving his claw at people he knows. It's possibly odd that the leptosomatic Mario eye, so damaged he can't even grip a stick, much less flail at a moving ball with one, is the one kid at ETA whose company Schtitt seeks out. Is in fact pretty much the one person with whom Schtitt speaks candidly, lets his pedagogical hair down. He's not close to his prorectors, particularly Schtitt, and treats Aubrey de Lint and Mary Esther Thode with a formality that's almost parodic. But often of a warm evening, sometimes Mario and Coach Schtitt will find themselves out alone under the East Court's canvas pavilion, or the towering copper beach west of Comad, or at one of the initial scarred redwood picnic tables off the path out behind the headmaster's house, where Mario's mother and uncle live. Schtitt savoring a postprandial pipe, Mario enjoying the smells of the Calliopesis along the ground's quincunx paths, the Swedish pines and the Brier's yeasty musk coming up from the hillside slopes. And he actually likes the sulphury odor of Schtitt's obscure Austrian blend. Schtitt talks, Mario listens, generally. Mario is basically a born listener. One of the positives to being visibly damaged is that people can sometimes forget you're there, even when they're interfacing with you. You almost get to eavesdrop. It's almost like they're like, if nobody's really in there, there's nothing to be shy about. That's why bullshit often tends to drop away around these damaged listeners. Deep beliefs revealed, diary type, private reveries indulged out loud, and listening. The beaming and bradykinetic boy gets to forge an interpersonal connection he knows only he can truly feel, hear. Schtitt has the sort of creepy wiriness of old men who still exercise vigorously. He has surprised blue eyes and a vivid white crew cut, of the sort that looks virile and good on men who have lost a lot of hair anyway. And skin so clean sheet white it almost glows, an evident immunity to the sun's UV. In pine-shaded twilight, he is almost glowingly white, as if cut from the stuff of moons. He has a way of focusing his whole self's concentration very narrowly, adjusting his legs spread for the varicelles and curling one arm over the other and sort of drawing himself in around the pipe he attends to. Mario can sit motionless for really long periods. When Schtitt exhales pipe smoke in different geometric shapes, they both seem to study intently. When Schtitt exhales, he makes little sounds variant in plosivity between P and B. Am realizing whole myth of efficiency and no waste, that is making this continent of countries we are in, he exhales. You know myths? Is that like a story? A made-up story for some children. An efficiency of Euclid only, flat, for flat children. Straight ahead, plow ahead, go. This is a myth. There aren't any flat children, really. This myth of the competition and bestness we fight for, you players here, this myth, they assume here always the efficient way is to plow in straight go. The story that had the shortest way between two places is the straight line, yes? Yes. Schtitt can use the stem of the pipe to point for emphasis. But what then when something is in the way when you go between places? No? Plow ahead, go, collide, kabong. Willikers. Where is their straight shortest then? Yes. Where's the efficiently, quickly straight of the Euclid then? Yes. And how many two places are there without there is something in the way between them, if you go? It can be entertaining to watch the evening pine's mosquitoes light and feed deeply on luminous Schtitt, who is oblivious. The smoke doesn't keep them away. When I am boyish, training to compete for best, our training facilities on a sign, very largely painted, stated, "We are what we walk between." Gosh, it's a tradition. One stemming maybe from Wimbledon's All England locker room's tympana that every big-time tennis academy has its own special traditional motto on the wall in the locker rooms. Some special aphoristic nugget that's supposed to describe and inform what the academy's philosophy is all about. After Mario's father, Dr. Incandenza, passed away, the new headmaster, Dr. Charles Tavis, a Canadian citizen, either Mrs. Incandenza's half-brother or adoptive brother, depending on the version, C.T., had taken down Incandenza's founding motto, Te osidere possunt sed te idere non possunt nefas est, and had replaced it with the rather more upbeat, the man who knows his limitations has none. Mario is an enormous fan of Gerhardt Schtitt, whom most of the other ETA kids regard as probably bats, and as without doubt mind-loosingly discursive, and show the old pundit even token respect, mostly because Schtitt still personally oversees the daily drill assignments and can, if aggrieved, have Thode and DeLint make them extremely uncomfortable more or less at will, out there in the AM practice. One of the reasons the late James Incandenza had been so terribly high on bringing Schtitt to ETA was that Schtitt, like the founder himself, who'd come back to tennis and later film from a background in hardcore math-based optical science, was that Schtitt approached competitive tennis more like a pure mathematician than a technician. Most junior tennis coaches are basically technicians, hands-on, practical, straight-ahead problem-solving, statistical data wonks, with maybe added knacks for short-hole psychology and motivational speaking. The point about not crunching serious stats is that Schtitt had clued Incandenza in all the way back at a BS 1989 USTA convention on photoelectric line judging that he, Schtitt, knew real tennis was really about not the blend of statistical order and expansive potential that the game's technicians revered, but in fact the opposite, not order, limit. The places where things broke down, fragmented into beauty. That real tennis was no more reducible to delimited factors or probability curves than chess or boxing, the two games of which it is a hybrid. In short, Schtitt and the tall AEC optics man, i.e. Incandenza, whose fierce flat serve and haul ass to the net approach to the game had carried him through MIT on a full ride with stipend, and whose consulting report on high-speed photoelectric tracking the USTA muckety-mucks found dense past all comprehending, found themselves totally simpatico on tennis's exemption from stats tracking regression. Were he now still among the living, Dr. Incandenza would now describe tennis in the paradoxical terms of what's now called extralinear dynamics, and Schtitt, whose knowledge of formal math is probably about equivalent to that of a Taiwanese kindergartner, nevertheless seemed to know what Hopman and Vandermeer and Bollettieri seemed not to know, that locating beauty and art and magic and improvement and keys to excellence and victory in the prolix flux of match play is not a fractal matter of reducing chaos to pattern, seemed intuitively to sense that it was a matter not of reduction at all, but perversely of expansion. The aleatory flutter of uncontrolled metastatic growth, each well-shot ball admitting of n possible responses, n squared possible responses to those responses, and on into what Incandenza would articulate to anyone who shared both his backgrounds as a Cantorian continuum of infinities of possible move and response, Cantorian and beautiful, because infoliating contained this diagnate infinity of infinities of choice and execution, mathematically uncontrolled but humanly contained, bound by the talent and imagination of self and opponent, bent in on itself by the containing boundaries of skill and imagination that brought one player finally down, that kept both from winning, that made it finally a game. These boundaries of self. You mean like the baselines are boundaries? Mario tries to ask. Lieber Gott, nein! With a plosive, disgusting sound, Schtitt likes best of all smoke shapes to try to blow rings, and is kind of lousy at it, blowing mostly wobbly lavender hot dogs, which Mario finds delightful. The thing about Schtitt, like most Europeans of his generation, anchored from infancy to certain permanent values which, yes, okay, granted, may admittedly have a whiff of proto-fascist potential about them, but which do, nevertheless, the values, anchor nicely the soul and course of a life. Old world patriarchal stuff like honor and discipline and fidelity to some larger unit. Gerhardt Schtitt does not so much dislike the modern Onanite US of A as find it hilarious and frightening at the same time. Probably mostly just alien. This should not be rendered an exposition like Schtitt was educated in pre-unification gymnasium under the rather Canto-Hegelian idea that junior athletics was basically just training for citizenship, that junior athletics was about learning to sacrifice the hot, narrow imperatives of the self, the needs, the desires, the fears, the multiform cravings of the individual appetite, if will, to the larger imperatives of a team, okay, the state, and a set of delimiting rules, okay, the law. It sounds almost frighteningly simple-minded, though, not to Mario across the redwood table, listening, by learning in palestra, The virtues that pay off directly in competitive games, the well-disciplined boy begins assembling the more abstract, gratification-delaying skills necessary for being a team player in a larger arena. The even more subtly diffracted moral chaos of full-service citizenship in a state. Except, Schtitt says, ach. But who can imagine this training serving its purpose in an experialist and waste-exporting nation that's forgotten privation and hardship and the discipline which hardship teaches by requiring? A U.S. of modern A, where the state is not a team or a code, but a sort of sloppy intersection of desires and fears, where the only public consensus a boy must surrender to is the acknowledged primacy of straight line pursuing this flat and short-sighted idea of personal happiness. The happy pleasure of the person alone, yes? Except, why do you let de lint tie Pemulus and Shaw's shoes to the lines if the lines aren't boundaries? Without there is something bigger, nothing to contain and give the meaning, lonely. Verstingenheit. Bless you. Any something. The what? This is more important than that there is something. Schtitt, one time, was telling Mario, as they respectively walked and tottered down Calm Avenue eastward into Allston to see about getting a gourmet ice cream someplace along there, that when he was Mario's age, or maybe more like Hal's age, whatever, he, Schtitt, had once fallen in love with a tree, a willow, that from a certain humid twilight perspective had looked like a mysterious woman aswirl with gauze. This certain tree in the public plats of some West German town, whose name sounded to Mario like the sound of somebody strangling, Schtitt reported being seriously smitten with the tree. I went daily to there, to be with the tree. They respectively walked and tottered, ice-cream bound, Mario moving like one of them who was truly old, mind off his stride because he was trying to think hard about what Schtitt believed. Mario's thinking hard expression resembles what for another person would be the sort of comically distorted face made to amuse an infant. He was trying to think how to articulate some reasonable form of a question like, but then, how does this surrender the personal individual wants to the larger state or beloved tree or something stuff work in a deliberately individual sport like competitive junior tennis, where it's just you versus one other guy? And then also, again, still, what are those boundaries if they're not baselines that contain and direct its infinite expansion inward, that make tennis, like chess, on the run, beautiful and infinitely dense? Schtitt's thrust and his one great, irresistible attraction in the eyes of Mario's late father, the true opponent, the enfolding boundary, is the player himself. Always and only the self out there on court to be met, fought, brought to the table to hammer out terms. The competing boy on the net's other side, he is not the foe. He is more the partner in the dance. He is the, excuse or occasion for meeting the self. As you are, his occasion. Tennis's beauties, infinite roots, are self-competitive. You compete with your own limits to transcend the self in imagination and execution. Disappear inside the game, break through limits, transcend, improve, win. Which is why tennis is an essentially tragic enterprise to improve and grow as a serious junior with ambitions. You seek to vanquish and transcend the limited self whose limits make the game possible in the first place. It is tragic and sad and chaotic and lovely. All life is the same. As citizens of the human state, the animating limits are within, to be killed and mourned over and over again. Mario thinks of a steel pole raised to double its designed height and clips his shoulder on the green steel edge of a dumpster, pirouetting halfway to the cement before Schtitt darts in to catch him. And it almost looks like they're doing a dance floor dip, as Schtitt says this game, the players are all at ETA to learn. this infinite system of decisions and angles and lines Mario's brothers work so brutishly hard to master. Junior athletics is but one facet of the real gem, life's endless war against the self you cannot live without. Schtitt then falls into a sort of silence of someone who's enjoying mentally rewinding and replaying what he just came up with. Mario thinks hard again. He's trying to think of how to articulate something like, but then, is battling and vanquishing the self the same as destroying yourself? Is that like saying life is pro-death? 3 passing Allstonian street kids mock and make fun of Mario's appearance behind the pair's backs. Some of Mario's thinking faces are almost orgasmic, fluttery and slack. And then, but so, what's the difference between tennis and suicide? Life and death, the game in its own end. It's always Schtitt who ends up experimenting with some exotic ice cream flavor when they arrive. Mario always chickens out and opts for good old basic chocolate when the moment of decision at the counter comes, thinking along the lines of like, better the flavor you know for sure you already love. And so, no different maybe, Schtitt concedes, sitting up straight on a waffle-seared aluminum chair with Mario beneath an askew umbrella that makes the flimsy little table it's rooted to shake and clank in the sidewalk's breeze. Maybe no different. So, biting hard into his tri-colored cone, he feels at the side of his white jaw where there's some sort of red well, it looks like. Not different. Looking out into the avenue's raised median at the Green Line train rattling past downhill, except the chance to play. He brightens in preparation to laugh in his startling German roar, saying, "No, yes, the chance to play, yes." And Mario loses the dollop of chocolate down his chin because he has this involuntary thing where he laughs whenever anyone else does. And Schtitt is finding what he has just said very amusing indeed.